This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered.
Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 220 of the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network. Many clinicians, educators, and school leaders know they should be working collaboratively, but don't know how to find the time to do it. If you have a friend or colleague who seems to have magical productivity powers, I promise there's a method to the madness. Most likely they've gotten really good at a concept that I call asset stacking. It starts with asking yourself the question, what can I create now that can save me time or effort later? So in this third episode of the three-part clinical leadership series, I share the concept of asset stacking and how it can be used by both current and aspiring clinical and educational leaders to make an impact on the systems they're working in. I'll talk about creating a long-term strategic vision for your professional growth, the concept of asset stacking and how to use it to impact systems, multiple service delivery models that position you as a leader, and how we can use the concept of service delivery models and asset stacking together, and how you can develop a master plan that aligns your expertise with system needs. So the takeaways from this episode is that asset stacking compounds your influence over time. Your unique combination of skills can create a distinct value in the system that you're working in, and that service delivery innovation can position you as a thought leader. And I hope that one of the action steps that you take after listening to this episode is that you begin your leadership master plan by identifying your unique stack of professional assets, and you can identify one system level challenge that they could address. An example of a system level challenge that many of my listeners want to address is getting their team on board with supporting executive functioning. That is why I created the School Leaders Guide to Executive Functioning Support. So this course is for you if you're in a leadership position or you're aspiring to be in a leadership role and you want to create a plan to get your team supporting students' executive functioning across the day. The School Leaders Guide to Executive Functioning Support is a 7-day email course designed to help school leaders launch their executive functioning implementation plan. To learn more about the course, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/school leaders. Now, I hope you enjoy the final clip from the Clinical Leadership Series.
So the next concept is the concept of master planning. So here we want to plan for the long term first, and then plan for the immediate short-term goals second. So what we're doing when we're master planning is we are shifting from thinking about micro only to the macro and the micro together. So what we're doing is we want to create our long-term to-do list that will help us plan what assets we can make, with our master plan being the first asset. So as I shift to the last part of my conversation, I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by an asset stack, giving you some examples of scalable protocols that you can build, and at the same time, how you can use this concept of master planning to figure out how to get all of this done on top of what you already have to do in your very busy life. But before I give you some of that tactical advice, I wanted to shift and get us in the right mindset for thinking about how we're going to do this successfully. So When we're doing this kind of work, we are not just talking about changing our own behavior. We are asking others to change their behavior. Obviously, when we're working directly with clients, we're working on behavioral change, but now we're working on behavioral change of other people that we work with, people in adjacent disciplines, families we're supporting, or even the people who are leaders that we report up to. And what we're doing is that we're asking them to commit time and energy to something that they may or may not see as something that's important, or maybe they might not be aware of yet. So these are really important questions that you want to ask yourself whenever you are developing an asset or trying to form a relationship or trying to create a protocol that you might want to share with somebody else and have them do eventually. So really important. So asking yourself the question of, am I taking work off of this person's plate or adding to it? Am I leading with this person's pain points or am I focusing on mine? Am I connecting the dots for this person or am I making assumptions about what they know? I'm going to pause here because I could give you an example of how I have thought through this in the past. There have been times when I was working in the schools and I had students who, the teachers were referring them to me and saying they're never following directions and they're never following along, or they're, being defiant when we're doing a writing assignment and they're getting distracted and distracting the other kids and not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I could clearly see in many of those situations that this student has some executive functioning issues. They have language processing issues. Maybe they don't understand the directions. Maybe the environment is set up in a way that is not front-loading information and supporting them. And just maybe there's not the right scaffolding in place for the student. And that's why we're seeing all of these behaviors. I see this and I can draw that connection that this student needs some support in language and vocabulary. The student needs the teacher to model certain things, and they might need some accommodations. I draw that connection that this could be a language processing issue. However, the teacher might see this as a behavioral issue. So when I'm leading and when I am presenting something to that teacher, I'm not going to lead with me talking about all the things that I think are so amazing and exciting and interesting, like language processing and executive functioning. What I'm going to lead with is what is important to that teacher and how this is going to make her or his life easier and eventually take something off of their plate, because it might actually be a little bit more work for them up front while they're learning how to implement it. So I might frame it a little bit differently and maybe lead with, this is going to address some of those behavioral concerns. And then I'm going to weave in the things that are important to me later on, but I'm going to lead with what's important to them. So I'm going to always have those things in my frame of mind when I'm presenting this to that other person. I'm going to go through some of the other questions here because a lot of these are important when you're leading up and talking with leaders. Am I facilitating or eliminating a decision, or am I giving this person more decisions to make? Am I judging this person for having different values and pain points than me? Or am I focused on a solution that can address both of our values and pain points? So obviously these remaining 3 questions could be relevant for anyone that you're working with, but I find them particularly relevant for when you are asking for something, especially if it's someone who is in a more senior role than you. Going back to that idea of leaders have a lot of decisions that they need to make. And many times if you go to them with a problem, and if it feels like you're coming at them with a laundry list of complaints, what you're doing is dumping work on their plate. So when we're thinking about assets, we want to think about, how can I eliminate some of those decisions and make this an easy yes? What can I do to offer something and prepare for something up front that's going to solve an important problem that this person cares about, even if it's something that maybe I don't think is as important, or I think that my thing is more important than theirs. How is this going to take something off their plate? And how am I going to present this in a way that it's easy for them to say yes and and requires as little work as possible on their part? So we always want to think about that. when we're preparing assets and making these suggestions. So moving on to the final part of this presentation, going back to this concept of planning for therapy versus planning for service delivery, just to give some examples of assets. Again, what we're doing when we're thinking about shifting from what am I doing in therapy to what models am I using, all we're doing is thinking about things that we can build that are going to make us more efficient and going to start to allow us to weave in some of these other models so that we are still very much focused on that direct intervention component of our role that's so important for what we do, but that we're weaving in some of these other things so that we can amplify the impact of that direct intervention that we're doing. So on the left side here, we have therapy protocols, lesson plans, and materials. Those are examples of assets. All we want to do is start to layer on other assets once we've developed some of those therapy protocols, materials, and those things that we would use in direct intervention. So we're kind of building things up front, and once they're built, we can start to stack other things on top of them. So when I talk about assets, I'm talking about things, I'm talking about protocols, I'm talking about knowledge and trainings that you could develop and repeat over and over. I'm talking about relationships that you can build that are going to help you to team up with someone and maybe offload some of this work and delegate some of these things, or help you to get to some of these goals faster. So the primary reason, like all of these things that I'm sharing with you, most people think that consultation is important. Most people think collaboration is important, but we're not doing these things because of time constraints, lack of clarity, lack of confidence in our ability to be able to implement them, resource constraints, and knowledge gaps. So this idea of scalability and stacking different assets and creating something that's going to allow you to invest some time up front, but then it's done and you can stack other things on, what that's going to help you do is break through some of these barriers to give you the confidence that you're going to be able to implement this. So going back to this concept of scalability, again, when we think about scalability, it's what the actual definition is the potential for growth and expansion. And when we're developing things, as we are going through our day and developing some of those things that we might use for ourselves, all that we want to do to set ourselves up to figure out what assets we might want to build is ask ourselves the questions of this thing that I'm doing that's going to help my clients, that's going to help them reach their goals. What is my protocol for doing it? How are we going to define it? Is it possible for me to document and repeat this protocol myself? And does it make sense to scale this to others? Sometimes the answer might be no, and that might be fine. But you might be able to, in many situations, scale it to other people and share this with someone so that they can support your clients outside of your therapy room. Then we have to think about who should I share it with? Who am I going to start with, right? We don't necessarily want to start with everyone at once. The concept of stacking and layering is we might be building one relationship at a time. We're not implementing this in the whole building at once. Maybe we just start with one teacher or one colleague that we want to share this with and start building from there. And then, of course, we have our implementation plan, which is how am I going to scale it? What's my plan going to be? So I wanted to give you a couple examples just to make this a little bit more tangible for you and share how I've been able to do this myself. So here's an example of an asset stack that I have done personally and that I have suggested for other clinicians who have been in a situation that was similar to mine. So the very first thing that I recommend people create when they want to start thinking long-term and thinking about how they can impact their team using multiple service delivery models is their own personal long-term strategic plan. The reason that I recommend that you start with this is because when you have your own strategic plan, and this is something that could be, when I get to the master plan, I'll explain a little bit more about the potential time frame. But really what I'm talking about here is anywhere from 90 days to 18 months or so. Those are the time ranges that I typically do for myself. Personally, right now, I'm doing 18 months when I'm thinking about strategic planning. I'm thinking about what do I want to do for the next year. And what I'm doing there is developing my priorities and the big things that I want to accomplish over the next year. And I am developing what I refer to as the master plan. What that master plan allows me to do is it allows me to slot in the most important things on my to-do list so that the most important things are there and they're accounted for and they're non-negotiable. And then when all of those other little fires and those immediate things come up, I've already set aside my dedicated time for building assets. The reason that I recommend starting with that long-term strategic plan is that what it allows you to do is create a window of time where you're going to be specifically dedicating to developing assets. So for me, what I did was I had, when I was an SLP, when I was in the schools, I knew that one of the things that was taking up a lot of my time was that I did not have a good system for language therapy. So I set aside dedicated time every week to developing assets, which the asset for me, the first thing that I created was a language therapy protocol. So any extra time that I had, that dedicated asset building time that I had, was spent developing that language therapy protocol. Once I established what that protocol was, it was done. I had put that time in up front in figuring out what this was and what I was going to do. Once it was built and I got to the implementation phase and I got to the point when I had figured things out for myself to the point that I was ready to share it with other people, that's when the next asset that I focused on. So when I had that dedicated time for asset building, the next thing that I slotted in there was that I really wanted to focus on collaborative partnerships. So extra time that I had, I would figure out, can I spend this time doing outreach and emailing people and trying to set up times to meet with them, or actually having a face-to-face meeting with a special education teacher, for example, using that extra time that I had to developing those collaborative partnerships. Those collaborative partnerships, once I had kind of established that relationship, and in my situation, it was with one of the special education teachers, we decided that we wanted to use that time to collaboratively build some literacy training materials that we were going to use with some of our students on our caseload. So it led to building another asset. And then beyond here, these are just some other examples of how you could use this. You could take those literacy materials that you develop with that partnership and develop a work group that involves other people. So you're leveraging that relationship and those things that you've built to expand this to other people, because now you've got another person who can help you with this. And then you could get to the point where you as a team form your own long-term strategic plan team-wide. So here's how this can grow and build on each other. Another just really quick asset stack example that I often give SLPs. So one of the other things that people come to me with is that they often struggle with, they feel like they're not sure how to address both language therapy and executive functioning. So what I often recommend is that the first asset that they build after they create their plan is that they create systems for language therapy. So that system is the first thing that I recommend that they build. Not because I don't think other things are important, but because I want them to build an asset and get comfortable with it so they can move on to other things. Then I have them create systems for executive functioning in a small group and get comfortable with that. And then the next phase and the next asset is that they create a plan for adding other service delivery models to support language and executive functioning. So it's a phased approach. We're focusing on one thing at a time. Notice that in phase one, I'm still having them focus on direct intervention, but it's for the purpose of moving on to those next phases and adding those other models, so it's not overwhelming. The main thing, and I want to make sure that I get through a discussion of my master plan because we're close to the end here, is that what the point that I want to drive home here is that there are things that you can't control, but really the secret to leading up is leveraging what you can control, which is your ability to use your own time to build assets and systems, and then understanding what you can influence. You're asking other people to do different things that should change their behavior. They might not always agree and do what you want them to do, and not everybody will buy in. You can certainly influence them with the way that you present things to them, but you can't control them. So there's this balance of what you can control, which is you, and what you can potentially influence, which is other people. Not control, but potentially influence. And really understanding how those two things go together is how you can figure out what the maximum impact is that you can have. All right, finally, the master plan, really quick here. Okay, how I do this is that, and this is actually how I figured out how to do a dissertation while I was working full time. So what I start off with is my 12 to 18 month plan. And this is where I recommend people start with their first asset. I have them start with that 12 to 18 month plan and just block out in quarters, just at a very high level. What are the big things that I want to accomplish in this quarter? Meaning 3 month, like 90-day period. So if you go 12 months, that's 4 90-day blocks. Then I have them, you zoom in to the 90-day plan. So what are the big chunks that I want to figure out in these 90 days? And usually in the 90-day period, I like to break it up into 1 month. So just zooming in just a little bit more from that strategic plan. And in the present 90-day period, zooming in and figuring out what are the things that I want to accomplish in this 90-day period. And oftentimes broken up into months. And then I don't get to an actual to-do list until I zoom into the present month that I'm in right now. And I use what I planned in the 18-month, in my long-term 18-month plan, and my 90-day plan to come up with my 2-week task list. The first thing that I put in that 2-week task list are those things that are going to lead me to my long-term goal. So what my task list is, literally how I do it right now. Obviously, you can do whatever you want to do with format, but it's just a list in a Google document of what I'm going to do, the action items for every day, with the assumption that the very first things that go into that list are the things that support my long-term goals. Then I start slotting in my daily routines, and then those little short immediate fires that come up get slotted in after. And that's how I get things done. But this is where I recommend that you start. But the important thing is that we start with the long-term goals before we get to that 2-week task list. And many times people do this in reverse, and that's why they don't get to those long-term goals.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for more information about the School Leaders Guide to Executive Functioning Support, a 7-day course that shows school leaders how to get started with their executive functioning implementation plan. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/school leaders. I created the School Leaders Guide to Executive Functioning Support because educators have to be everything to everyone in current times. There always seems to be a new initiative, and it can be really difficult for teams to implement yet another standalone program. But the great news about executive functioning support is that it doesn't require complicated materials. It can be seamlessly layered onto existing practices and amplify the effort that you put into content area curriculum. And most importantly, executive functioning support can help you to differentiate instruction for those students who need support in special education as well as general education. It can be a really powerful universal design initiative that ensures you're meeting students where they're at. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/school leaders. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts, and share this episode with anyone you think would benefit from the information. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.